Welcome to Just Now Possible with Teresa Torres.
Hi, I'm Shota Papiashvili. I'm the SVP of R&D here at ZenCity.
I'm Andrew Therriault. I'm the VP of Data Science. I oversee applied AI and methodology.
Hi, I'm Noa. I lead product at ZenCity.
Excellent. And tell me a little bit about what does ZenCity do?
ZenCity powers the work of government with community voices. Essentially, we work with local governments. That means cities, counties, sometimes even states, and law enforcement agencies as well. So think about your local police department or the sheriff's department. And we work with them essentially to make sure that they are aware and informed of what their public and their residents think, feel, want, and need about different things. So that can really inform decisions that they're making, how they communicate back to their communities, and really make sure that the community is being heard and can impact every decision and everything that their local government body does for them.
Amazing. As a Discovery fan, I feel like this is a very missing piece in public sector. Based on your description, it sounds based in the US.
Yes, mostly in the US. We also work with local government agencies in Canada and in the UK as well.
Oh, excellent. All right, let's go ahead and dig in. Tell me a little bit about the AI product that you're building.
So the main platform, the product that we're building is around, as we said, powering government work with community voices. And so the three, I think, main pillars that the platform does is reach, understand, and act. So helping local government reach as many people in as many ways, in as many places, to hear as many voices. And then, of course, really understand what these voices are saying. What is the community as a whole saying? What's happening in different areas in the community, and with different segments of the community? And then, of course, turn that into action, whether it's policy or budget decisions, or again, communicating back to residents. So we've always had a lot of AI baked into different areas of the platform. We need AI in order to analyze a lot of different inputs and voices at scale. And we need AI in order to synthesize and summarize and make that more understandable and actionable. And now we're definitely looking into and working on adding AI into additional elements as well to really close that loop and tie that into action. And so the AI product that we were thinking to talk about today is sort of essentially an area in the product that will, I think, really implement both of these approaches to AI in a really interesting way. So one is this element of synthesizing and summarizing a lot of different voices and themes into sort of a very cohesive and understandable summary. And then also implementing that into executive briefs that we are working on in order to, again, help our clients close that loop into action.
And I would just add that there's no one AI product that we have or one part of our platform that is specifically only AI. We have a lot of different use cases. Some of them are really fundamental things that, as a data scientist, I've been doing since long before we called it AI, things like topic modeling and sentiment analysis. But then we're also doing a lot of generative AI applications. So Noah just mentioned that we're working on content summarization and reporting. A few years ago when we were doing that, it was very formulaic. We would extract a number from, say, a survey analysis, and we would insert it at a very specific place in a report. And we'd use very fixed logic to say what comes after that. Nowadays, we're much more flexible. We're able to use LLMs to customize that to fit specific use cases. We're also thinking about more innovative applications, for example, using AI tools to automate much of the process of creating a new survey questionnaire, something that currently is done by our analysts as a very manual process. We're taking some of the best practices we learned from that and figuring out how we can use AI to automate some of those repetitive tasks and ensure they're done both efficiently and consistently throughout our process.
Yep. And I think that it's also worth to add that during all these years that we built the ZenCity product, we built it for the AI era without knowing it, because we collected as much data as we could. We tried to find use cases where those kind of very powerful tools can be applied to. So we built a company to be ready for the AI era, even without knowing it coming. And now we see, as Andrew mentioned, we currently see the different use cases that we can apply AI into our offering and service to our customers.
I have to say, your problem space just resonates with me so much. Every time I get a really poorly designed survey from my city, it just infuriates me. So I think you're doing amazing work. I love the way, Noa, that you described this as reach, understand, act. Before we dive into a specific AI function, I'd love to just understand broadly, like I can imagine at the city level, at the county level, probably even harder at the state level, like how do you reach people? I'm curious about who in these local governments is the users of your product? Like how does let's say a survey get kicked off? Do they design the survey? You mentioned you have analysts. How are you reaching people? Like, just give me the overview of like, how does this ecosystem even work?
So we run surveys for a wide range of different use cases. We have two core templates that we've been using for years. One are our general purpose community surveys. They ask about all different range of aspects of life in a community, from access to good healthcare in schools to satisfaction with cleanliness and maintenance of public facilities, things like that. We also have another standard survey called Blockwise, which is our public safety survey. So we ask about people's sense of personal safety, their relationship with law enforcement in their communities, things like that. So those are made for very specific use cases. The community surveys are often used by city managers, mayor's offices. They're really helpful to say, what are we doing well? What can we improve upon? Where should we dig into more? The Blockwise law enforcement survey, that's more focused on law enforcement agencies, and they're often using it to track what's going on throughout our community. And so we're doing targeting, and not just at the city or county level, but within those areas, we're also targeting, say, police districts, so that they can say, oh, we're seeing this problem in this part of the city. Let's direct more attention there to see if we can resolve it. But on top of that, we also have what we collectively call our pulse surveys. They're basically our custom surveys, and those come from any number of different sources. They might be from a mayor's office or city manager. They might be from an individual department. Just recently, I was talking with one client about a survey where what they want to do is they want to understand price pressure on renters across the city, to build a map to say, where are people at risk of displacement? And so we're working with them on a really unique survey specifically targeted at renters about how they, not only what their experience has been in terms of has their rent gone up, things like that, but what is their thought process in terms of how that impacts their overall financial situation, whether that's making them more likely to move to different areas. That's a really unique case. We've done other things around public health. Remember, I've been working with ZenCity full-time for a year, but I was a consultant before that. And I remember back in the kind of peak COVID era, we did a lot of surveys around things like vaccine hesitancy, where we'd work with public health agencies to understand why people might be averse to getting vaccinations. And for those, we actually did custom analyses that broke people down into different clusters of profiles. We have a lot of flexibility in how we can provide these services. In terms of how we actually do our surveys, our general approach is to use online surveys through a mixed variety of channels for recruitment. So most of our recruitment tends to go through direct recruitment through web or social media advertising. We also use some survey panels, particularly to help fill in around the edges with harder to reach populations. Right now, we're piloting SMS distribution for these surveys and just constantly looking for ways that we can incorporate new ways of reaching people, because we know there's no one single place to do that anymore.
Yeah. There's also a really important element of listening to the community, right? And that's essentially what's happening on social media in a more organic type of way, right? What are the responses to the different city official channels, but also what are residents saying about the city in different posts? What's going viral? What are the different themes and what's going viral? And all of that type of thing, including, by the way, what themes come up when people call 311 and complain about things, and what are they complaining about more versus less? And what's the nature of those complaints, and really listening to all of these voices in the different ways that they're expressed is also a really important thing. And I will say that sort of the emphasis is very much on the community voices. So it's very much not around specific people and names, and all of those things get obfuscated. because the goal is to really, again, identify those themes. What are people thinking and saying, to get that really well-rounded picture of what's happening in my community, what's happening, like as good a, I'll say a word that can be loaded for us. What's the best representation of the community as a whole, right? In the different ways that we can get them, and really building a holistic picture out of that. And I think in general, this really feeds into context, which is, I think, a huge dimension especially in AI products, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you build and complete and perfect the context going into this? Because in the end, that's what makes more of an impact on the output of the AI than maybe even the AI itself, and exactly how you do it that way.
So Noa, am I right? And do I understand what you're saying about it's not, your platform isn't just a survey tool. You're also going out and mining kind of trends on social media. And it's really like a lot of companies hire like brand listening tools. Is it fair to say it's a social listening tool for city residents or state residents?
Yes, very much. And I will say, as someone who actually originally started out in product management and brand marketing platforms, right? I like the difference between some of the sort of tech and approaches or methodologies, or not methodologies, but like the technical ways to do it are pretty similar, right? Because you need to listen and collect and consolidate. But it's really different when it's a brand listening to customers versus when it's a government body listening to their residents. And sort of privacy is different here. And we're very, I think, diligent around making sure that we extract the community voices aspect here and not the specific individual voices here, because there's sensitivity there, of course, and also in bringing in those different, identifying all of the different places, even the way that we can assess and gauge sentiment. And here I'm getting into Andrew and Shota territory, but even that is pretty unique to government and needs a different and unique model for that. So the purposefully built aspect here is really important for the social listening and survey aspects.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think that we add some pretty unique tools to gather more voices. For example, we have a tool to run an in-person engagement meeting within City Hall, for example. So those kind of things of physical meeting places and collect feedback from that is pretty unique to our customers if we compare that to brand awareness products.
This is amazing. I will tell you, like, my entire career, I've really focused on how do we help companies understand their customers. And one thing that has really been in the back of my head for over a decade, and I just haven't figured out how to even get a toe in the water, is how do we help policymakers co-create with their constituents? And a lot of what you're doing is really giving them signals and input and customer voice and feedback, constituent voice in this case. But really just feedback on how do we make sure that our government leaders are serving the people, which is amazing.
A big part of the premise of ZenCity in the first place is this thing we call the same 10 people problem, where if you think about how local government operates, if you've watched Parks and Rec, I used to be a local government official. We consider it a documentary. But you know what? The problem we're trying to solve is really that if you go to like in-person community meetings in that very traditional model, it tends to be kind of the same people showing up every time. And their voices are the ones that get heard more than any others. And so part of the real motivation for everything we do is how do we bring in the voices of people who aren't showing up to those meetings, they might have to work evenings, they can't show up, or they have kids to take care of. It's not just a handful of people who like have a grudge to pick. We want to represent the voices of everybody. And part of what makes that a challenge is that there's no one place to get all of those. That's why, as Noa mentioned, social listening is just as important as surveys. The key is, and this is really one of our biggest AI challenges right now, how do we bring together insights from across all of those different data sources to present a cohesive story? And that's one of the things literally I work on every day.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dig into this. I'm going to try really hard not to spend the whole hour just talking about what you do, so that we can continue to be an AI podcast, but maybe afterwards we can nerd out on this stuff some more. Based on what you've shared so far, it sounds like synthesis is a real challenge, and I would love to explore that.
I would want to frame it around workflows, like to really show how the synthesis leads into something really specific, because I think that sort of there's this recurring theme that I've heard in your other conversation, Teresa, as well, that in the end of the day, we're not building AI to build AI, right? Like we want to power things that people are already doing or want to be doing and can't do or can't do well. And so that's why I would want to take this into the workflows aspect here. And I think that can also be interesting because that's a very unique government flavor to all of this, which I think is of interest.
Yeah, okay. So tell me about this workflow product. Before we get into the AI pieces, who's using it? Who's a consumer of it? What does it look like today? What do they do? Give me the customer context around it.
Yeah. So first off, I love that you use the term consumer because that's very much something that we're looking at as a distinction here. Currently, in terms of active users within our platform, we have a lot of hands-on personnel in resident communications, for instance, and analysts. Not every city is lucky enough to have an Andrew or someone with Andrew's caliber on team. Some of them do, some of them don't. But those are the type of people who are active users within our platform. But of course, the insights and the information that we can help drive, and of course the decisions are very, very much need to be consumed by really executive stakeholders within the government organization, right? The city manager, who was very similar to a chief executive in a company. They manage a lot of people. They manage budgets that are typically bigger than most of the big brands and companies that we know, right? And so we very much want them to consume the information within ZenCity, even though we understand that they might not be active users in the platform. So this additional distinction of who is using our platform hands-on and who we want to make sure consumes this is a really significant piece that we've been thinking on as we're going into this, right? Yeah. How do we make it so that chief executive of city will actively consume information coming from ZenCity?
This actually raises an even broader question for me, which is, like all of us on this call, we can think, of course, our city leaders should be listening to community voices.
Yeah.
But that's like me saying, of course, product managers should be talking to their customers. And we can all agree on that, but then the reality hits of, I already work 50 hours a week, and where am I going to find the time? I imagine for city leaders, this is even more extreme. They have plenty of urgent things all day, every day. Do they know this? For those leaders themselves, Do they know this platform exists? Do they know this data is available to them? Do they have decisions they're trying to make? And they're like, I wish I had community voice data. Give me a sense of what that looks like.
Yeah, so for sure, they are very much aware that they are ZenCity clients. And in many cases, for instance, like once we run and conclude a community survey, like Andrew described, or a Blockwise survey, then we, like the ZenCity team, actually present to a really senior group within the city because, again, these insights and takeaways are really important for them. And they want to be informed and know what's happening in the community. And of course, there are additional situations as well. So there are different workflows in a government sort of organization's day to day. And without going into too much detail, I'm doing this at Government 101 because I know that it's super interesting, but there are overall a few main workflows. We can think about budget planning for a city, annual. Sometimes it's even more strategic than that when a city builds their 5-year strategic plan, for instance. And so that's, of course, something that needs to be informed and very much guided by community voices and priorities and wants and needs, right? But there's also performance management within a city organization or a law enforcement department, right? Understanding how are they performing, where there are different departments, like Parks and Rec is an actual department in the city organization. So what are people thinking about parks and recreation services, right? What are they thinking about education, public health, public works, all of these different types of things. So performance management is a big one. There's also resident communications ongoing. There are strategic projects kicking off in a city. There are occasionally sort of crises happening. Maybe there was a horrific accident or a school shooting. Maybe there is a hurricane or tornado coming into the city, or it's just like hurricane or tornado season, right? In an area that is afflicted by that. And so many things that can happen that sort of change the way that the city listens and communicates to the residents at this moment in time. right? So like what we're looking to build here is really to orchestrate these workflows in a way that truly injects the community voices to the right people at the right moment in time in the different workflows. For instance, when we're thinking through this annual budget process, for instance, right? How do I make sure that when the city officials and team kick off this process, they are armed with a really intensive, a really in-depth brief of what we've heard and listened and deep dived and asked the community with over the last year overall for different government services and themes coming up, right? Satisfaction, dissatisfaction, all of that, for instance. How do we then allow them to deep dive into things, to double click into different areas in the city or to double click into different themes so that they can make decisions in this planning process that takes upwards of 6 months from a year?
So it sounds like these workflows are like moments in time when ideally a city leader would be drawing on community voices.
Exactly.
Okay. And are they called workflows in your product? Are they saying I'm now doing my annual budgeting?
Yes, we actually these words have been really like a really big part of our conversation. Mm-hmm. They're mostly referred to as workflows, sometimes work streams as well, and mostly by their names. And I think in other words, it's pretty easy to identify that these workflows are the jobs to be done. Right? There's that overarching jobs to be done for a government agency. Every one of these breaks out into a lot of different sub jobs to be done. And so within a annual budget planning process, the city manager has their jobs to be done. Their chief of staff has variations on that. The different department managers have jobs to be done within that. And they employ analysts and they employ a lot of other people who also contribute to that. So very much, I think this connects to this overarching objective that we have, which is, again, closing that loop on making sure that we are powering the work that they are doing. We're not trying to teach them to do different things or to do things differently, but we want to power that and inject those community voices into everything that they're doing. So that's exactly identifying and then using their words like annual budgeting and crisis management and performance management. And for law enforcement, that can be CompStat or EMPStat or SheriffStat or a lot of different variations of that as well, which we are implementing within the platform as we speak, pretty much.
Okay, so let's talk through like this annual planning for a city workflow and help me understand like where's the AI piece in this process?
Basically, we also support on-demand brief generation, right? The fact that on one side we understand and we find out that currently the city goes through annual planning is just a trigger to trigger our engine that creates those artifacts at the end. And that engine is also exposed to our customers to do any ad hoc query, and we call it the assistant. We have our own ZenCity assistant, and the assistant and all the brief generation is using the same underlying infrastructure. And that infrastructure, and the most simplified version of it, it's just a model that has access to all of the data that we aggregated over time in different levels of granularity. It has access to the raw data, but it has also access to one step above it, which is our insights that come out of that data, or any aggregated numbers or any aggregated understanding from a single data collection. That entire engine can take whatever it decides to take, because we eventually expose all the data via MCP server and different tools to the model. And then the model can actually decide what data it wants to take and to build the answer. Though the work streams that Noa mentioned are actually the cases that we see the most requests for. We started that journey a lot of years ago when we got those ad hoc queries from our customers. Hey, I'm doing an annual planning thing. Can you tell me a little bit about what my residents think about? So we heard multiple of those, so we decided to build that into the platform. But besides that, it's the same engine that runs everything else, which is at the most lower level. It's a model with access to data on different levels, so it can make good deliverables out of it. Andrew?
Yeah, I would just say it might help to think of these workflows as a sort of packaging of the different pieces that we've created over the years. So let's take the example of the budget planning workflow. There are different parts of this process where we have the ability to weigh in and contribute value to the end users who are the officials in local governments doing this budget planning. And one of those components is that we've developed a standardized survey template for budget prioritization. That goes beyond our standard community survey, which just says, how happy are you with each of these things? Yeah. That template digs in further and says, what are the things that you think need more investment? What are the things that you think actually we spend too much on right now? And if the local government were to invest in 3 different areas that you could pick, not off a list, just anything that we haven't mentioned, where would you want to see that money go? So that might be the first part of a process where we bring in that feedback from residents. And then the parts we add on to that are the enrichments and analysis. So we can bring in complementary data from social media to see how does what we're hearing in these surveys track with what we're seeing in the discussions online. Because oftentimes we will see, if we just listen to the people having those conversations online, that might not be a representative subset. That's why we go out and we select people through a more scientific representative process so that we can get that diversity of views. But then we can package this together in a variety of different forms. It might be for some users, they want to look at a dashboard. In others, they want a slide deck. Others, they want to see a really tight 2-page written report. And so where the AI part comes in is figuring out how do we take the same information, put it into these different formats to make them most useful to the different kinds of profiles of the end user, whether it's the city manager, a budget analyst, whoever, give it to them in the format that they need, they find most useful, and do it in a way that we can be confident in the quality and the consistency that no matter how they get at that data, they're seeing the same numbers. They know that they can trust what they're seeing. Obviously, that's one of the biggest challenges of deploying AI in the real world these days is how do you track that and make sure that what's being spit out by GPT-5 or whatever model you're using is actually reflective of the underlying data. And that's what we spend a lot of our time on, making sure that we get that exactly right.
So it sounds like you have a lot of input sources. You can run surveys, you're doing social listening. All of this is going into a database of here's all your city data. If I understand right what Shota said, there's an AI assistant where I can literally type in and say, what do my residents care about? And with time, you've started to notice some patterns across those requests. And so you've created workflows around some of the most common requests. And then the goal with both that AI assistant and those workflows is how do we make all this data accessible to people in their preferred format?
And in the right time.
And at the right time. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because a lot of times when we are talking about surveys, we've been talking about it in the context of one survey, but take our community surveys. Many of the clients run those every quarter. Those blockwise public safety surveys, many clients are running them monthly. And so we're collecting a lot of information over a long time frame so that we can track trends. So that's also where the AI part comes in, is figuring out how do you present these in a way that you can do these more detailed over time analyses, understand patterns. That's where a lot of the complexity comes in as well.
And there is a use of AI on every level. So on the granular single datum level, we do sentiment analysis and categorization. On the more broader level, so we understand trends and we look for anomalies. And in the last section, we do summarization and creation of different formats out of the thing. So we have different models deployed in different parts of the pipeline to accomplish different outcomes out of the model itself. So we have multiple uses of different models in the pipeline all across.
The way, at least that I think about it in my mind, is that ultimately what we need to be doing is building out this like really web of different things, right? Because we have all of these different inputs and we need to synthesize them in different ways at different times for different people, for different purposes. Because in the end of the day, like again, we're just like every builder organization, we are trying to build things that people need that they actually work with. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's really identifying that like both the dynamics of those processes and also the mechanics of those processes, right? Who is asking what question at what time and at what answer, like at what level are they looking to answer for? How can we, if I'm really thinking towards the next level for us in terms of workflows, it's okay, how does this all come together for the different types of personas, right? How do I make sure that we have one really timely and actionable, really strong brief for a city manager, but also have an equally strong brief for Parks and Rec and an equally strong brief for every other department manager, right? How does that all come together? When do they discuss them? When do they discuss it within their teams, outside of their teams, as a city executive team, for instance? And so that's really interesting to looking at what they're already asking and how they're asking it. And there's also a really interesting element here of the type of answers and acceptable answers that they're used to getting. Because I think that an element that we have here in local government is both that these are very traditional workflows. We're building a very techie product for very not techie people, or some of them are, but they're not driven from the techiness of things, right? But by continuing to deliver the same things that cities have had to deliver for their residents for the last, how long have we been living in cities? 200, 300 years. So I think that sort of doing like that adds a really interesting element to everything that we're doing. And especially if we're looking into things like survey methodology, which is very traditional. And there's this whole element, which that's not AI specific. So we probably won't get into that whole element of how did people run surveys when people used to answer the phone and people used to answer at the door when you knocked versus how does it make sense to run surveys today? But like in the end of the day, we're again like building something with really advanced technology to answer really age-old questions and making sure that we're doing it in the best way. And that we're helping to surface to our users what's possible, what's the best way to do it. And going back to that using versus consuming even, right? How do we make these outputs accessible when to who? Some people will meet most of these outputs in their Outlook inboxes because that's where the manager starts and finishes and goes through their day, right? Sometimes they'll meet it in a printed form, right? So we need to think about that piece as well.
I want to go back to something that Shota said around the layers. And I kind of want to work the opposite of what I intuitively would normally do. I want to work bottoms up. So normally I would want to start with the customer and what are they asking for and what do they get? But I have a feeling if we start there, we're going to spend a lot of time on city stuff. And I want to make sure we get into the AI stuff. So I want to start backwards. I want to start with, you have all these data points. And Shota, one thing you said was you're already doing sentiment analysis. Tell me a little bit. I want to start with data, and then I want to move up to insights. And then I want to move up to like how you're even handling any query through your AI assistant. But let's start. I imagine the answer to that last question has a lot to do with what you're doing at the data layers. So let's start with, you have survey data coming in, you have social listening data coming in. What's happening at that bottom data layer?
Yeah, so let's start out by thinking through like the different sets of data we're bringing in. So you mentioned surveys, we have social media posts and comments. We're also bringing in news articles. We're getting 311 requests and other internal operational records. We also do post-interaction surveys. So if somebody makes a 311 request, we follow up afterwards to see how that interaction went. We have other kinds of direct resident engagements, for example, around planning projects. The city might post, hey, here's our plan for this new neighborhood or this new recreation center, and give people an opportunity to give feedback on that. I'm probably missing something, but the point is we have a lot of different kinds of data that come in. The first step after we've gathered it and centralized it, pretty basic data warehousing stuff, is to enrich it. And Shota mentioned sentiment analysis. We bring in, I think, somewhere close to 1 million social media items a day. And so every one of those gets labeled with sentiment, which we've built a model that is specific to local government. Rather than just saying, is this positive or negative sentiment in general, it's specifically orienting it towards the local government. Somebody might make, I don't know, a positive comment or say a negative comment about some particular problem, but it's in the context of the government is doing something to fix it, then that's not actually negative towards the government, because it might be, for example, if they're commenting on a post from the city saying, hey, we're working to solve this problem, and they say, this is a really big problem, that's actually not a negative thing. We've customized it to fit that. We're also doing topic modeling. So we can apply topic labels to individual data points, where that's really that glue that binds these different data sources together. So topics are a central organizing feature on our platform. If you log into the platform as a user today, you can click on topics. It might be, for example, police and law enforcement, or I don't know, parks and recreation, high level things like that. Also some more granular ones. That's how we organize our data. So that it basically allows you to filter it, and users can also create their own within the platform as well. For example, we actually use semantic search in there to use the natural language text embeddings to do searches, so that it's not just a matter of matching on keywords. You can actually search the data content itself. But so we apply these labels inside the platform. And in doing that, we apply both our standard set, and also for different data sources, we can apply custom ones. For example, if we do a survey on a brand new topic that we've never really asked about before, chances are we'll have these really granular themes that pop up. So we can apply new labels on demand. But then in our platform, we have the bigger picture standard set that organizes most of what we have. The point there is that we can label the same topic in a survey, as in social media, as in a news story, as in even a 311 request that relates to the same thing. That topic level is the bridge between those. And I mentioned the platform is where we can see that, but also we do that for things like AI content summarization. So you'd asked about that workflow of going in and using an AI assistant. We have two branches of that AI content generation. One is user-driven, where we have an AI assistant, the second version of which is about to launch very shortly to all of our customers.
Today.
Great. I didn't know when we wanted to make that public. So it's the second version because we had an earlier version that we decided wasn't good enough because we hadn't solved that underlying data problem yet. Thankfully, Anthropic invented the MCP protocol, and now suddenly we went back, redid it with better access to data, and it works the way we intend. So that's for our ad hoc requests. But then we also have these more structured formats. We talked about things like an annual budget planning brief that synthesizes data in a certain way. We also have what we call our multi-thread summarization tool, which operates at the topic level and lets you basically do a cohesive report among all the different data items you have within a given topic. So that if you want to say, okay, what's going on in public safety today or over the past month or whatever time frame you want to give it, this will go through, read all the posts, all the comments, all the news stories, synthesize it, extract the common themes, and present a report that is a mix of qualitative and quantitative insights to help you get up to speed. You can think of it as like the analyst that you would otherwise have to hire to go through and read all those things and report back. But this does it in a matter of seconds or minutes.
Yep.
Okay, so I have all these data endpoints coming in. It's being enriched. It sounds like the two primary factors it's being enriched by are sentiment, but sentiment about the government, and then topic. And then, Shota, I think you described as another layer above that of insights.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about what's happening at the insight layer.
Between the raw data and the insights, we also have another layer that we call highlights.
Okay.
So, for example, highlights can say discourse about homelessness grew by 30% last week. So those kind of really finding what's going on in the data and just surfacing that. That
Kind of
is
trends.
Yeah.
Trends in the data.
Trends. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the second layer. The third layer is insights. As Andrew mentioned, we can take an entire topic and including the raw data and the highlights for that topic, and from that create an insight. An insight will be a very detailed and valuable content around a specific topic. And that topic can be either one of our predefined topics or any custom topic that our customers can define. And the last layer, or the golden layer, if we use some data engineering terms here, the gold layer will be the brief that will take multiple topics and a workflow that is top of mind for our customer, and create the brief from all the different layers of data that we have about the specific topics that are involved in that workflow.
Okay, I love this because one pattern I'm starting to see is the underlying data model and how we organize our data and how we enrich our data has such a big impact on how well an agent can make sense of that data. And so I love that you got to this level of detail. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
You can see me shaking in my seat wanting to jump in here because there's a layer 1.5 too, because we have the highlights that Shota described of here are the most notable findings. Yeah. Those are algorithmically curated. We've been producing those for a few years based on pretty predefined rule sets. Right now, what we're building is that kind of middle layer between raw data and the highlights, tentatively called elements, which is essentially that kind of pre-computed layer.
Yeah.
Because what we found from an efficiency standpoint, maybe stop me if I'm getting too technical about this, but part of where we realized we had an issue when we went and first tried to just feed a bunch of raw data to an AI assistant. Didn't work. Turns out LLMs aren't great at math still. No surprise. I wasn't too shocked by that. But so then once MCP servers became an option, now we have all these APIs we already built for our platform. For example, if you pull up a dashboard showing your community survey results, that's hitting these existing APIs that will do things like compute the overall quality of life score for the last quarter, or whatever number you see, that's coming from an API. So now we have MCP servers that can access the same APIs. So that works pretty well for those on-demand reports. The trick is, though, is that was designed for one query at a time. Maybe you're loading 10 numbers that go on a dashboard. But when you're doing these kind of massive AI-driven content summarization exercises, what's happening is you want to look across hundreds, thousands of data points to figure out what's most interesting. And what we realized pretty quickly was we can't do all those calculations on the fly. So instead, this elements layer, it's not doing the kind of editorializing of the highlights layer, which says we're going to have a small set of things we know are important. This is a wider layer that says we're going to pre-compute these things. And then the next step down the road will be sorting out among all the possible options, which are most interesting. So in a way, it's a pyramid model, right? Where you have at the bottom layer, it's a lot of data. And then each layer, it gets narrower and narrower. And depending on which layer you pull from, you're doing a trade-off of like the simplicity of getting at it and the speed you can get at it and the detailed richness of the data. So long-term, where we want to go with this elements layer is to think of it almost like a recommender system where we can say, okay, there's all these possible results we could show you. Now we can filter it based on indicators for whether that's an interesting result or not. For example, comparing to historical patterns, is this trend meaningful or is it just maybe regular variation? But then also we can say, hey, this end user is a police chief versus works in a parks department. That can also help us select which of the things we want to put at the top of their feed. And big picture vision, we want to be at that level where we can say, hey, it's not only we're producing something for Boston or New York or LA or Chicago or, I don't know, Normal, Illinois, but we're also saying, hey, this is for John or Mary or Jim, and this is their job, and this is what they have read, really dug into in the past. This is what they search for. Great. Now we can say that's what they find interesting. almost how Amazon or another company like that would do e-commerce recommendations. We can do the same thing for results to say, hey, this is what we think you should pay most attention to.
Let me see if I can summarize back again. So I've got a data layer. This is just my raw data points. Today, you have a highlights layer, which is looking at trends across those data points. You're working on introducing this elements layer, which, Andrew, I heard a little bit might be your math layer.
Yeah,
do some
it's
pre-calculations.
Yeah, it's doing all the permutations of those API calls so that like we don't have to do it on the fly. We know every combination of demographics and time frame, things like that.
Yep. Okay. And then will that elements layer, I imagine your highlights layer could get even better.
Yeah.
Having access to all of those elements. And then tell me what's happening at the insights layer.
As I said, insights are generated on a specific topic. So we take all the highlights and raw data that we have about a specific topic in a specific time period, and we generate a description or understanding of, an explanation of the raw data and the highlights in a very short form or a very concise form. So that's the insights layer. So we drive insights for a specific topic in a specific time.
So maybe like an interpretation, like here's all the data points, here's the math copy permutations, we've seen some trends. Now our insights are going to interpret those trends in the context of a time window and a topic.
Exactly.
Yeah, It's like a detail level where if you imagine at the bottom level, the raw data is just like a data point. And then that elements layer is like a number. The highlights layer is a sentence that puts that number in a little bit of context. And then the insights layer is like a paragraph that provides not only describes that highlight, but also the other relevant information around it. And then that kind of top layer of briefs or reports or dashboards or whatever the final format is, that's the like page level version.
Okay. And I want to get to the workflow part because I think that is very interesting, but I want to start with your AI assistant because this like, I can enter freeform anything is always a really interesting challenge. So I work at a city, I load up your tool, I have an AI assistant and I type in, I work at Parks and Rec, I want to know what are the programs that are most popular that people also love. What happens when I type that in?
So that's a good question. And a good question is something that happened to you in the past. I met our great friend from the city of Boston, the CIO, a few weeks ago, and I showed him the AI assistant before we launched it today. And his first ask was to challenge the AI assistant with something like that. So the first question that he asked the AI assistant is, what's the favorite ice cream flavor from Bostonians? And the assistant told him, I don't know. I have no such information. So that worked well for us.
That was a huge win. That
sounds like a huge win.
Exactly. So we are trying to build some guardrails around the assistant and the freedom that we give it. So we tell things in our system prompt for the assistant. So don't guess, don't try to make up data, use only the MCP servers that we give you that exposes our APIs. And for every fact that you're putting into text, please, the exact data point that you drove that decision from. And with those guardrails, over time, we improved our AI assistant over and over. And the fact that we are launching it today in general availability is the result of a very long process of iterating and iterating exactly that, to put the right guardrails and quality controls on the AI assistant for us to give something that we stand behind and we really believe that can give value to our customers, but in the same time to also keep our integrity of the data and the big methodological aspects that we always take into account when we are building or shipping new features and capabilities in the platform.
So you're bringing up something that came up on a recent episode. I did an interview with a team from this company called Neeple, and Neeple makes digital coworkers for companies. And one of the things that those digital coworkers do is they suggest, they do automatic replies to customer support emails. So somebody sends in a support ticket and the Neeple replies. One of the challenges with this is they don't want the Neeple to reply with general training data. They want the Neeple to reply only with data that's in its company's knowledge base, because it has to be specific to the company. And so they built probably like 50% of their LLM calls are evals. And a lot of their evals are around, is this statement in this email that's about to go to a customer grounded in our knowledge-based data? And so I'm curious if you've had to do a similar thing of if the AI assistant is going to return back a report or return back data, are you having to put evals in place to make sure that data is, it sounds like you've done a lot of prompt iterating to make sure it does that. Is that also backed with evals to make sure that everything is actually coming from your data warehouse?
So I'll just, like the evals question is a really good one. And I think, and like we've been talking amongst the three of us lately, I think more specifically on evals and who does which eval when, honestly, not even getting into how as much as the who and when. And I think that just like the sort of the topology of what Shota and Andrew described, right, that there's also a topology of the different types of evals, right? Because you need to evaluate, for instance, the correctness of every element, right? Like we'll have those. You need to evaluate the noteworthiness, for instance, and the correctness and validity of every highlight. And then, of course, you need to evaluate the insights themselves. And then, like, even beyond that, the broader evaluation that I very much want my team to start looking into more, right? Of like, how valuable is this whole thing together as a budget brief versus how valuable is it as like an end of week type of summary or brief? Is this valuable enough or insightful enough to drive a budget conversation versus is it like more of a research element, right? Can it be strong enough to kick off like budget offsites that cities have? So there are so many different types of evals and levels of evals, and so styles of them as well. The methodology and practicality of doing it can probably also differs, right? So there's like a ton to unpack on our side still on how we're doing evals in a really good way. And the answer will be different for every single layer here.
And I realize like even asking my question, like it implies that you should have been doing those things. And I get the reality of product teams. And one thing that I really love even about what you said, Shota, is if you're using data, tell us what data you're using. Even that is like a way to check, does every data point have a citation? So like, I'm very aware there's like the ideal world. We'd love to have full eval coverage on everything. I don't think I know a team that does.
In ideal world, maybe we will add some kind of eval in flight. But when we are trying to meet needs from response time, for example, we can't afford ourselves to double the response time of the assistant just to verify. So what we are doing is we are doing some of weekly annotations on our model. So we want to track the accuracy and the precision and recall, although those are not as clear in LLM outputs as in other models. But we still try to make sure that our model and assistant is consistent over time. But currently, there are no in-flight evals before we respond the answer to the query to the user.
Shota, you just highlighted a really important distinction that I want to highlight. In the Neeple case, they're sending email. Latency is not an issue, right? And they can afford to run production line evals. In your context, you have a human waiting for a response. It's a very different requirement, especially from a latency standpoint. So I want to call that out because I don't want any of you or any of our listeners to walk away thinking I'm saying you should have had all of that. But I also want to encourage you to listen to that Meeple episode because I think you might be able to draw some inspiration from it.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add to this that so the validations we do in flight right now in this are more about the input. So for example, sanitizing the initial request, making sure it's a good fit for the tools we have, and confirming that we've correctly translated the request into the MCP server invocation, that we're actually pulling the data we intend. One of the things that we've been doing, so I've particularly been focused on that, the kind of longer form scheduled or structured outputs rather than the AI assistant. And when we've done that, what we realized we had to do as we were going through is we realized we can't give numbers to the LLM, that we couldn't verify that with the required consistency. What we ended up doing is essentially telling the LLM, just give us essentially a placeholder, an anchor for the actual data that you want to insert in this. And then at the end of the process, we basically copy it in. So for example, if one of the things we include in our multi-thread summaries are anecdotes of every theme. And so we tried just basically passing the anecdotes into the LLM to generate the report. And we found sometimes it was verbatim. Sometimes it was just slightly reworded. Sometimes it just made something up that sounded what we had given it. So we realized, no, we need to provide the exact quote and a link to the source. So those are deterministic. They are not AI generated. I think that's the key. Is we're very realistic about this. Part of the reason we're not doing that evaluation in line is we're not doing anything in there that we think is at high risk for that. Because we've tried this, we've realized that it's much better to say, here is a link. This link is useful than try to recreate what's in that link.
This is another theme that's emerging, which is being really thoughtful about which steps should be LLM driven and which steps should be deterministic. Yeah. And even letting the LLM help with, I think these are the right resources, but you being able to say, okay, let me go get those resources. Yeah. I'm seeing that pattern emerge quite a bit.
Yeah, and one thing we're doing long term is working on building an LLM as a judge system, where essentially the starting case is going to be the next version of our topic models. To basically, we'll create the topic labels and then use a different model, maybe use a different LLM model because they're all imperfect, but they're generally imperfect in different ways. We'll basically pass the same information and say, hey, here is a data item. Here is the definition of a category we want to apply and specific examples. This is a positive or negative label. This is in this category. This isn't in this category. Do you agree with this? We'll pass that to a different model. And then that model will come back and it'll either confirm or it'll dispute. And then we're building that out so that then when it's disputed, we can route that for human review, both to correct that specific item, but also so that we can understand what are the systematic things that these models are not catching. And then the same workflow can also apply to things like the AI assistant, where we say, here were the inputs. Here's the inputs of the initial request. Here is the data that we extracted from our MCP servers, and this was the final output. Does this make sense? Yep. And as Shota said, latency is the main reason for not doing that right now. I'm hopeful that future models are going to get good enough that we're adding a negligible amount of time if we do that, but that's the goal.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I think we've almost completed the full picture of I type something into the AI assistant. I work at Parks and Rec. What are my most popular activities that have positive sentiment? Let's just say. It's going to go through. It sounds like you help me understand the role of MCP here. It sounds like you got a big boost when you switched from like direct API calls to MCP.
Yeah, so the one step that we haven't covered in this is the first thing that happens when you make that call. After it says, is this a reasonable request? Okay. Like you can't ask about recipes or something that's like politically problematic or something like that. But after that, it says, okay, great. What data do I have access to on this? Because that question of what do people think about different programs we run really depends on, have we done a survey that asks about that? Yeah. So the first step is simply querying and saying, what data do we have for this client that matches this topic? Then once we have that list, then we can formulate the specific queries that say, okay, we have this survey from June and another one from December. Great. Let's go pull the top level results from each of those surveys. Now let's do breakdowns. Like we can pull those results. We can see, oh, here are the questions we want. Great. Now let's grab not just the top line results, but let's grab the breakdowns by different demographics or different geographic subgroups, things like that. It's
And
this iterative process.
How much of that is agentic, where the agent is trying to understand the intent of the query and determining it's reached that, versus
100%.
it is 100% agentic?
Yeah.
So there's not,
100%.
Andrew, those steps you were describing wasn't a deterministic workflow. The agent is deciding, I need to go pull those things.
We're basically giving it a starting instruction that this is how you start the process. We've provided instructions on here are the resources you have access to, and then basically say, start your process, like check, make sure this is a reasonable question. If so, and actually that's a separate query that we always do at the start. So just to do that sanitization, once we have a good query, then it's basically an agent from there on, where we give it a set of instructions for how it should do it by looking up what data it has available and then continuing to drill down. But yeah, it's an agent-driven workflow.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the big change that MCP introduced into the process is the negotiation for the data. Before MCPs, we tried to build our own MCP style of you, Mr. Model, decide what data you want. You return the response to us. We collect the data behind the scenes and we give you back the data. So because all those hops and different exchange of data, we did it only one way. So the model had one shot to understand and ask for the data. And now with MCP introduced, there are multiple cycles of communication between the model and the data. So the model can ask, first of all, hey, what surveys we did before? And then the API will give the agent the list of surveys. And then the model can ask, okay, so I need the results of survey 1, 2, and 7. So now please give that to me. So all those negotiations around data and understanding different data to pull into the model is now offloaded to the conversation between the model and the MCP server. And we don't need to put any compute of our own in the middle. That was a big load of a response time eventually, that compute in the middle for us to make sure that all the data will arrive to the model. That one. And the second thing is multi-tenancy, right? We don't want data from different customers to be involved with other customers. So that's why we rely on our APIs, because the multi-tenancy model is already enforced there. So we use the same enforcements and security layer that we use for our APIs, also for the MCP server, so we can guarantee that multi-tenancy is gatekept as it should be, and data is isolated to this tenant that you're currently querying for. So one, negotiation for data, and multiple queries for data by the model, and the second, the multi-tenancy model guarantee.
I would say the thing to note that you said that I think is really important is APIs. Because if you remember the history of this, we built these MCP servers on top of our existing APIs. Yeah. What those were initially built for was primarily our dashboards. And if you're thinking about what the agent is doing, imagine the agent is very quickly clicking all around a dashboard that a user could have access to. Like they're able to do all the filters really quickly, click from one survey to a next, switch over to look at social media. It's a super user in a way. Yeah. They have the ability to just go through. It's really the analogy of you get an analyst and give them a few hours with the website and let them pull all the information. The agent's just doing that in seconds.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really nice about just moving to this like tools architecture is it gives the agent a lot more flexibility to decide what it needs, and did it get what it needed or does it have to try again? Whereas if that was initially a compute step, like you said, Shota, you get one shot, and if it doesn't work, the whole trace is done.
Exactly.
Okay, this is amazing. I feel like we got a pretty complete picture. I'm assuming your workflows are almost like templates of what you could have received through the AI assistant. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now
That's
you're,
definitely right.
I think one of the challenges with chat interfaces is your customer has to know what to put in. And so a common way to solve this is you just tell us you're doing annual budgeting and we'll get you the briefs you need.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's spot on in terms of a lot of users don't know how to be that super expert analyst and user, right? And don't necessarily know what's possible. And so building in these, not just templates, but I think it's even more, it's a different kind of prompt. It's prompt a whole understanding of what they can do and what they can get and what this sort of newfangled thing can do. And in the end of the day, it brings it back into the thing that they want to be doing and not the newfangled way of doing it. So it's around, it all comes back in the end of the day to what they need to do, what they want to achieve, and how even to some extent they're used to doing it. But we're powering it like in the background by something completely different and I think arguably much better.
Yep.
Yeah.
One of the advantages of our industry is that everything is out there. So all, for example, council meetings, all the council meetings dates are available online. Their agendas are available online. So the next step that we are going to build is this orchestration layer of we should identify when the next council meeting is happening, understand the agenda, and then trigger this very robust and powerful engine that we have to create those briefs to prepare all the necessary briefs for our customers for the next council meeting, for example.
Amazing. That is amazing.
And then they don't need to know that we can do it and how to do it. They will deliver. Exactly. The city manager gets the full prep packet. The head of Parks and Rec gets only what's relevant to the agenda item that's around Parks and Rec, and so on and so forth. And that's how, again, bringing back to what we're trying to do, the mission, this is how we power their work with those community voices. We inject it, we send it in to the right person at the right time for the right reason.
I love the work that you're doing. I cannot express that enough. I could have spent the whole hour just gushing about what you're doing. It feels so important. I'm really glad we started at the data layer because I feel like you've been very thoughtful about how to manage the data in a way to make it really useful for an agent. I love that it really unlocked a true agent with a lot of flexibility with the right tools and to be able to respond to any brief request. It's just so powerful. And I also love that you're working in the public sector, but using really advanced technology. And something that I feel like that combination is very rare. So I want to be mindful of time. We are coming up on our time window, but I am a huge fan. And I want to thank all three of you for taking the time to share your story with us.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and give us a rating as it helps others find the show. Thanks, I appreciate it.